The air inside the small Nottingham branch of the Building Society carried the scent of old paper and polished wood, a familiar aroma to Margaret Holloway, who had been a customer for over half a century. At 92 years old, she no longer walked into the bank herself, but her daughter, Elaine, made sure her mother's affairs were in order. Elaine had always admired her mother's sense of financial discipline. Margaret, a former schoolteacher, had scrimped and saved throughout her life, carefully tucking away every spare pound. Her savings, along with her late husband Harold's pension, were meant to secure her remaining years, especially now that she required full-time care. Elaine thumbed through the pages of the worn passbook as she stood in line at the bank. The figures, carefully recorded over decades, told the story of a woman who had always planned ahead. "Next, please," called the cashier. Stepping forward, Elaine placed the passbook on the counter. "I just need to check the balance and make a small withdrawal," she said. The cashier took the passbook and scanned the recent entries. "Of course. Give me a moment." Elaine waited, glancing at the familiar surroundings. It was a quiet afternoon, with only a few elderly customers shuffling in and out. A young teller, no older than 25, tapped at a keyboard behind the counter. A frown creased her brow. "Just a moment," she murmured, her fingers moving faster over the keys. A second teller leaned in, whispering something to her. The two exchanged glances. Elaine felt her stomach tighten. Something was wrong. "Is there a problem?" she asked. The teller hesitated before finally responding. Well, I just need to confirm something with my manager. Could you wait here for a moment?" Elaine's heart pounded as she watched the teller disappear into the back room. Something about the way she had spoken set off alarm bells in her mind. She gripped the passbook tightly, staring down at the last recorded balance. Nearly £80,000. That was enough to cover her mother's care home expenses for at least a year. But something about the bank's reaction told her that number might not be real. A cold feeling crept up her spine. What if, after all these years, the money wasn't there? Elaine's fingers tapped anxiously against the counter as she watched the teller disappear behind a heavy wooden door marked "Staff Only." The hum of the bank around her seemed to fade, replaced by the thudding of her heartbeat in her ears. Her mother's money was her lifeline, her security. If something was wrong— No, she wouldn't jump to conclusions. It could be something minor, a clerical error, a system update. The minutes stretched. Other customers came and went, but Elaine remained rooted in place, her mind racing. Finally, the teller returned, her expression unreadable. Behind her, an older man in a navy blue suit followed. His badge read, "Branch Manager." "Mrs. Holloway," the manager said, nodding, "would you mind stepping into my office for a moment?" Elaine's stomach knotted. This was bad. "Why? What's going on?" The manager hesitated before gesturing toward the hallway. "It's best we discuss this privately." With a deep breath, Elaine followed them, clutching the passbook like a lifeline. The office was small, lined with gray filing cabinets and a single potted plant that had seen better days. The manager gestured for her to sit, then took a seat behind his desk, smoothing his tie before he spoke. "There seems to be a discrepancy with your mother's account," he began, his tone carefully measured. "The balance in her passbook does not match our records." Elaine blinked. "What do you mean?" The manager cleared his throat. "The most recent entry, showing a balance of nearly £80,000, appears to be incorrect. Our system records show a balance of £40,000. Elaine's breath hitched. "That's impossible. My mother has been saving for decades. That money is all she has." The manager held up a hand. "I understand this is distressing, and I assure you, we're looking into how this happened. But where's the rest of the money?" Her voice rose. "You're telling me half of my mother's life savings just vanished?" The manager's lips pressed into a thin line. Not quite. He reached into a file and pulled out a printed ledger. It seems that in 2022, a manual entry was made in your mother's passbook. An incorrect one. Elaine frowned. I don't understand. He placed the paper in front of her, pointing to a specific transaction. This £39,757 entry was an error. A banking clerk mistakenly added it to the passbook, but not to the actual system records. In other words, the money never truly existed. Elaine's head spun. You're saying my mother was living under the illusion that she had nearly double what she really had? The manager nodded grimly. That appears to be the case. Elaine's hands trembled as she looked down at the passbook. Her mother had relied on these numbers, believed in them. She had made financial decisions based on them. And now, just like that, half of it was gone. Except, it had never been there at all. The realization sent a chill through her. This wasn't just a clerical mistake. This was a catastrophe. Elaine sat frozen in the manager's office, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. Nearly £40,000. Gone. No, not gone. It had never been there in the first place. Her breath felt shallow. The weight of her mother's future, of the care home bills that loomed ahead, pressed against her chest like a physical force. She forced herself to speak. You mean to tell me that for the past 2 years, my mother has been making financial decisions, trusting her savings, based on a number that was completely wrong? The manager nodded solemnly. Unfortunately, yes. The error was purely in the passbook, not in our system. The funds were never actually deposited. Elaine let out a short, humorless laugh. And no one caught this? No one thought to check? The manager sighed. Passbooks are manually updated. It's a system we don't use as much anymore, given the shift to online banking. Errors are rare, but when they happen, they can go unnoticed for some time. Elaine shook her head, her pulse hammering. This isn't just an error. This is my mother's entire life we're talking about. The manager glanced at the teller, who looked down awkwardly at her hands. We deeply regret the mistake, he said. We want to assure you that this was not intentional. Elaine's stomach twisted. Regret won't pay for my mother's care home fees. She needs nearly £8,000 a month just to stay where she is. Do you understand what you've done? The room fell silent. Elaine's thoughts spiraled. Her mother had been adamant about never wanting to be a burden. After her father's diagnosis of dementia, Margaret had clung to the idea that her savings would be enough to take care of everything, that she'd planned ahead, and now, in one conversation, it had all unraveled. I need to tell my mother, Elaine whispered. The words felt heavy. Her mother, now in the twilight of her life, trusted that she was secure, that she was safe. How was she supposed to tell her that nearly half of her nest egg was nothing more than a bookkeeping mistake? The manager leaned forward. We understand this is a devastating shock, and we want to make it right as much as we can. We're prepared to offer £500 in compensation. Elaine's head snapped up. Excuse me? £500, the manager repeated, as a gesture of goodwill. Elaine's face burned. A mistake worth nearly £40,000, and they were offering the price of a second-hand washing machine? Her hands curled into fists. That wouldn't even cover 3 days at her care home. The manager shifted in his chair. We understand this isn't ideal. Elaine cut him off. Number, you don't understand anything. The reality of the situation crashed over her like a wave. This wasn't just about a mistake in a ledger. This was about her mother's future, her dignity, her home. A home that, at this rate, they might have to sell much sooner than planned. Elaine stood, her chair scraping against the floor. You can take your £500 and keep it. I'm not done with this conversation, not even close." And with that, she stormed out of the office, gripping the passbook so tightly her knuckles turned white. There was only one thing on her mind now. Her mother needed to know the truth. Elaine drove in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The usual 20-minute drive to her mother's care home felt like an eternity. How was she supposed to say it? "Sorry, Mum, but nearly half of your life savings never existed. It was a clerical error, a mistake. You didn't really have £80,000 after all." The thought made her stomach churn. She had spent her entire life watching her mother carefully manage every penny. Margaret had been meticulous about saving, cutting coupons, walking instead of taking the bus, knitting her own scarves instead of buying them. She had done everything right. And now, after a lifetime of financial discipline, her security had just evaporated. Elaine pulled into the parking lot of Rosewood Care Home, shutting off the engine. She sat there for a moment, staring out at the red-bricked building. She had to be strong. With a deep breath, she stepped inside. The air in the care home was thick with the scent of lavender and antiseptic. The hum of soft chatter and the occasional clinking of teacups filled the hallways. Elaine found her mother in her usual spot, the sunroom, seated by the window with a book in her lap. Margaret Holloway looked up with a warm smile as her daughter approached. "Elaine, darling, I wasn't expecting you today." Elaine forced a smile, bending to kiss her mother's cheek. "Hi, Mum. Thought I'd drop by." She took the seat beside her, heart pounding. Margaret placed a bookmark between the pages of her novel and gave her daughter a knowing look. "You look like you've got something on your mind." Elaine swallowed. There was no easy way to do this. Taking a deep breath, she said softly, "Mom, I went to the bank today." Margaret's expression remained patient, but the slight arch of her brow told Elaine she was listening carefully. "Oh!" Elaine hesitated for just a moment longer, then forced herself to continue. "There was a mistake, a big one, about your savings." Her mother frowned. "What kind of mistake?" Elaine placed the passbook on the table between them. "The balance in your book, the £80,000 you thought you had, it wasn't real. The bank made an error when they updated it back in 2022. Silence. Margaret blinked, her lips parting slightly. "I don't understand." Elaine took her mother's hand, her grip gentle but firm. "Mum, you actually have £40,000. The extra £39,757 was a mistake, a miscalculation. The money was never really there." Margaret let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "That can't be right. I've been keeping track. I know what I have." "I know," Elaine said softly. "You've always been careful. But this wasn't your fault. The bank made the mistake." "I've been counting on that money," Margaret interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the passbook, flipping through the pages. "Every time I checked, it was there. I trusted them." Elaine's chest tightened. "I know, Mom." Margaret's fingers gripped the edges of the passbook, her knuckles pale. "How could they do this? How could they just take it away?" "They didn't take it away, Mum," Elaine said gently. "It was never really there." Margaret shook her head, looking out the window. Her breaths came short and uneven. "I thought I had enough," she whispered. "For everything. For my care. For—" Elaine squeezed her hand. "We'll figure it out. I promise." Margaret didn't speak for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "How long can I stay here?" Elaine felt something crack inside her chest. With £80,000, they had estimated at least a year, possibly longer. But now, with care home fees at £8,000 a month, they were looking at just 5 months before the money ran dry. She forced herself to smile. "Let me worry about that, Mum. Right now, you just focus on taking care of yourself, okay? Margaret nodded absently, but her gaze remained distant. Elaine could see it. The creeping fear. The quiet devastation. And for the first time in her life, she saw something else in her mother's eyes. Helplessness. The bank had taken more than numbers from a ledger. They had stolen her mother's security, her peace of mind. And Elaine wasn't going to let them get away with it. Elaine sat at her kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea forgotten beside her as she sifted through the neatly stacked papers in front of her. Bank statements, letters, legal documents, evidence of her mother's financial history. Her mother had barely spoken after the revelation at the care home. The lively, sharp-witted woman who had once prided herself on financial independence had grown quiet, retreating into herself. And Elaine wasn't about to stand by and let the bank's mistake destroy her mother's peace of mind. She picked up her phone and dialed the Nottingham Building Society. After several minutes of robotic menu options and hold music, a customer service representative answered. "Hello, this is Fiona from Nottingham Building Society. How may I assist you?" Elaine took a deep breath. "Hi, Fiona. My name is Elaine Holloway. I need to speak with someone regarding a serious banking error that has affected my elderly mother's account." "Certainly. Can I take your mother's account number?" Elaine recited it from memory, her fingers tapping impatiently against the table as she waited. After a few moments, Fiona said, "I see the account here. It looks like there was an adjustment made recently." Elaine cut her off. "Yes, an adjustment of nearly £40,000, which your bank claims was a clerical error dating back to 2022. My mother was led to believe she had double the savings she actually had for 2 years. And now, because of your mistake, she may not be able to afford her care home fees for more than a few months. You need to explain to me how you plan to fix this." A pause. "I completely understand your frustration, Ms. Holloway, and I'm very sorry to hear this has caused distress. However, since the funds were never actually deposited..." Elaine's jaw clenched. "That's not the point. The point is, your bank allowed my mother to believe she had that money. She trusted your records. She made financial decisions based on them. And now, your bank is trying to sweep this under the rug with a pathetic £500 compensation offer. That's insulting." Fiona hesitated. "I understand. Would you like me to escalate this to our customer resolution team?" "Yes, immediately." "All right. I'll arrange for a specialist to call you within 5 working days." "That's not fast enough," Elaine snapped. "My mother is 92 years old. She doesn't have the luxury of waiting weeks for your bank to do the right thing. I need someone to address this now." "I'll see what I can do, Ms. Holloway, but this is standard procedure." "Then change the procedure," Elaine shot back. Another pause. "I'll escalate this as a priority," Fiona finally relented. "You should hear back within 48 hours." Elaine exhaled sharply. "Thank you. And let me be clear. If your bank refuses to take responsibility for this, I will go to the press. I will go to the financial ombudsman. I will not let my mother suffer because of a mistake she had no part in." "Understood," Fiona said, her voice quieter. "I'll make sure this gets urgent attention." Elaine hung up, pressing her palms against her temples. This was just the beginning. The bank had underestimated her. If they thought she would just accept their weak apology and walk away, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Elaine barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's face, the helplessness, the fear. It fueled her resolve. By morning, she was ready for war. She started by drafting a formal complaint letter to the Nottingham Building Society. Not just a letter, a case. She detailed everything: the financial impact, the emotional distress, the bank's failure to catch their own mistake for 2 years. But she wasn't stopping there. By mid-morning, she had already sent emails to 3 major newspapers. She found the contact information for financial journalists who specialized in consumer rights cases. Subject: 92-year-old woman. Betrayed by bank's £40,000 blunder. Within an hour, one of them responded. "This is shocking. Would you be open to an interview?" Elaine's pulse quickened. The bank wouldn't be able to ignore this if the public got involved. Just as she was about to reply, her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she had a feeling she knew exactly who it was. "Hello? Mrs. Holloway, this is Stephen Adams, Head of Customer Resolutions at Nottingham Building Society. I've reviewed your complaint, and I'd like to discuss a resolution." Elaine leaned forward. "I'm listening." There was a brief hesitation. "First, I want to extend our sincerest apologies. We recognize that this mistake has caused undue stress for your mother and your family." Elaine didn't respond. "Get to the point. We understand that the initial compensation offer was insufficient. After careful review, we'd like to offer a revised settlement of £8,000 as a goodwill payment." Elaine's grip on her phone tightened. "That's 1 month of care home fees. And what happens after that?" Another pause. "I understand this isn't the outcome you were hoping for, but as the funds were never actually deposited..." Elaine cut him off. "You don't understand anything, Mr. Adams. My mother believed she had that money because your institution led her to believe it. That trust was broken. Now, I've already reached out to several media outlets about this, and they're very interested in exposing how your bank treats elderly customers." Silence. Then, the shift in his tone, hesitation, worry. "We would like to avoid that," he admitted. Elaine pressed. "Then you need to do better." A long pause. "Would you be open to discussing a further adjustment?" Bingo. She forced herself to remain calm. "I expect a written offer by the end of the day. And if this call is just an attempt to pacify me, I promise you, by tomorrow morning, this story will be front-page news." Another silence. Then, "Understood, Mrs. Holloway. I'll be in touch shortly." Elaine hung up, her heart racing. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt something different. Not helplessness, power. And she wasn't stopping until she got exactly what her mother deserved. By the end of the week, the bank had tripled their compensation offer. Margaret received £24,000, not the full £40,000, but enough to extend her stay at the care home for a critical period. Elaine knew it wasn't perfect. The money had never truly existed, but at least now the bank had been forced to acknowledge their mistake in a way that actually meant something. More importantly, her mother felt safe again. And for Elaine, that was the biggest victory of all. Sometimes, justice isn't given. It's fought for.